Good evening, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020. As you know, this is my backup channel, but it's my main channel now after McDuff, Kennedy's man to smash the CIA, was terminated by YouTube. But we are reproducing all of our content as quickly as we can, doing a lot of technical stuff that I didn't know how to do before, but trust me, it's all coming back, and it's all good. Well, tonight, I'm excited to bring for the first time an interview with David Underdown. David Underdown has attended some of the charrettes that I've been at, and he has been proven to me that he's a superb researcher and has a great mind for connecting the dots. So without further ado, I welcome David. How are you tonight? And let me bring you right on up on the screen. There you are. Say hello,
Hey,
David.
hello.
Hey.
I'm good.
All right. And I'm for some reason my screen
Sounds
is
good.
frozen. I'm not sure why. On on the YouTube, it should be visible, but for some reason we're not getting. Well, I apologize, folks, if you're seeing a frozen screen. I imagine you can hear David's voice, and perhaps the screen will unfreeze of its own will in a moment. Let me,
Oh my God, frozen.
let me come back over here. Can you see the chat room, David?
Um, yes. Switch it to live chat here.
Yeah, let me see if I can get it up on my phone here and see if they can hear us. Yeah, okay. Guys, can you let us know whether you can hear? Yeah, David's just posted the question. Because I'm seeing you on Skype on my iPad, but when it's not getting transmitted over to the main screen for some reason.
Can't. Let me turn this volume up to see if we can hear it. Hello.
Hello?
It sounds like the sound is working, but there's no. It's just a frozen screen.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I'm afraid that's what we got then. The sound is 5 by 5, but the screen is frozen for now. I don't
It
know
says
why.
live, but I can just on the. I can just look at. I'll just look at the phone.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll just go ahead with audio then, David. And well, anyway, I was saying, welcome to the show, and how are you tonight? And I appreciate all of the great work you do, especially when I put something on Twitter, and you connect the dots right away and put up a couple of very interesting connections. You've been doing that frequently lately, and I appreciate it. But at any rate, although the screen is frozen, I think we can hear you quite well. So let's hear a little bit about you and how you got involved with George Webb and this crowd that we've, this Team W or the Ospreys, whatever you want to call us. You're definitely in the middle of the boat at this point. So
Yeah.
tell us how you got into this business with us.
It started off just I went to a school that was a lot like what I think your father went to, with a lot of kind of like the kind of the famous families of Detroit. And so I ended up going to college and got into the I studied finance at Boston College in 96 to 2000. And then I started working at Arthur Andersen in New York right after. So I was working at Andersen, and I got to see sort of being inside a company that was going through this international turmoil with the Enron situation, and sort of how just being inside an organization, seeing that was I didn't ever work on Enron. I was always mostly on Conagra was the client that I worked on, but just being in that environment, of course, with September 11th, happening when I lived in New York. I wasn't there that day, but my sister was, and going to BC, I had a lot of friends there, so that was a very impactful event for me. To be there and to sort of go through that process of coping with having that attack, and then traveling to work every day in the subway, and going into your building, and being evacuated every day, kind of thing, was just a really tough. So I ended up moving back to Michigan, where I'm from. I'm from a suburb of Detroit called Birmingham, and so I ended up moving back and working at a money management firm called Munder Capital, which was based in Birmingham, Michigan, and it was sort of had a famous reputation because it had the Munder NetNet Fund, which was the top performing mutual fund for a couple of years, like when the internet stocks kind of first came out in the late 90s. So I was working in equity trading there, and did that for a year, and that was a job that I really liked. I liked the culture and the people I work with, but the problem was that I could see that there was technology coming into the market, which was called LiquidNet, which was basically based off the Napster technology, where it was cutting commissions and trades and sort of reducing a lot of the kind of the back end, clearing functions of the trading desk. So it was really an area where I'm like, this isn't really going to go anywhere. And so I decided to go into my family's dry cleaning business, which was a business that my grandfather had founded in Birmingham in 1949. And so that was the challenges of working in a family business. And I did that for 16 years, and then I ended up selling the stores, and just really it was really rough for me in the end. I just needed to get out of there, so I sold it, and it was just a really tough experience for me to sell up my family's business. But I started I've always been interested in like financial markets and things like that, going back from college. And so I sort of saw the big picture, finance world, Wall Street, and then comparing it with sort of a small business, sort of running the day-to-day operation and sort of what it takes to run a business, was sort of the two perspectives that I looked at. So, watching George, it happened where I was reading a website called Zero Hedge, and somebody just in a comment wrote, look for this guy, George Webb, has been talking about this for a couple years now. And so I looked at a video, and within just this couple seconds, I was just hooked on it, because George was the only person I've ever known that had depth of knowledge in explaining something like my grandfather from Indiana, who had a very similar background to George's father, because he was somebody that grew up in Princeton, Indiana, which is southern Indiana. He went to Purdue University and was an electrical and mechanical engineer there. And then he worked for a company called Potter and Brumfield, which made relays, which is basically a device that is used in timers and sensors and different electronic components. So he worked there at Potter and Brumfield, which was actually the world's leading manufacturer of relays. And then he ended up working at RCA in Bloomington, Indiana, where he worked on the color TV project, was his big project. So that was that was just like an instant connection to listen to somebody so intelligent and just like with such ability to explain details of things, just was very appealing to me. So that was really how I got into it. And then, of course, if people have watched any of the, shows that I've been on or whatever, or know anything about me, I do have these, fringe personal connections to like a lot of these different networks. So it's, it's sort of how I am able to connect a lot of things is from just understanding the relationships of people from my own life, basically.
David, forgive me, but you seem to be awful young to have had so much experience. let me put it this way: when 9/11 happened, you were living in New York. How old were you at that time?
Um, I was 23. I went to Boston College, so like most, it seemed like a third of the people stayed in Boston, a third went to New York, and then a third like went anywhere else. And so it was my first job out of school. I got a studio apartment at 83rd and Third, and I was working in the Alliance Capitol building, which was like right at 54th and Sixth. So it was a very it was a prestigious job. It was, a consulting company. It also had a lot of interesting changes going on, though, that it had just broken apart from Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture, in a completely different company where they basically split a lot of their kind of their audit business was Arthur Anderson, which, if you're a publicly traded company, you need to have a company that's certified to do a public audit. And at the time I was there, it was called the Big Five, and Arthur Anderson was one of the large accounting firms. And then of course it had its consulting side, which for Anderson, was specifically was a lot with ADP, which is a big accounting software program that's used by a lot of corporations.
Yeah, I remember we used that in my law firm, doing the payroll. Um,
Hmm.
you mentioned also RCA, and am I correct that that got bought out by Serco? Um,
Yeah,
and that Serco is British, are they not?
they are. And like growing up, like it was so my grandpa was he was like George, he was just much more quiet, but if you asked him a question, the answer would be complete. But he was he had his workshop, and so we'd hear things like, when he retired, he had the most patents of any, engineer at RCA and stuff like that. And it never really, struck us as anything, because it was always like, well, he was a company man and he gave the patents. And, I didn't know the history of RCA, because, Bloomington just seems like it's, we went there all the time, and it's just a very charming Midwestern kind of college town. And it's, got all the beautiful limestone, buildings, and the campus, all limestones from Indiana. And like, it was just, it just didn't seem like anything, that Bloomington would do something on a grand scale, really, because it just didn't seem like that. And I didn't know that Bloomington was the color television capital of the world, and that basically my grandpa's work was, he was supposed to be kind of like the Seven Sigma tester guy, and he did all of the component testing patents for all the parts that would go in, to the different things. So that was so that was always just like a kind of a recurring theme of my life, is that I've, been sort of associated with different people, but they never, I don't know, it always seemed like New York or London or Paris, or, was always more glamorous than Detroit or Bloomington.
I always wanted to go to Bloomington. Bloomington has the famous Indiana University music school, and
Hmm.
a number of my musical friends either went there or ended up living there, including some really terrific fiddle players that I'd love to catch up with. Never made it to Bloomington though.
Well, it's a great place, and that, of course, I don't know if that connection was ever made, but the man that became the head of the music school was you know the roommate of my parents, basically, when he moved from he was his name was Willie Oppel, and he was a musicologist that had come from really, I don't think he was officially employed by Harvard or MIT, but he was very active in that world, and he wrote the a couple really influential books on musicology. And like, I know he was like very well regarded in like the Georgian chant and like sort of more of the medieval music. So that was that was sort of a you know again, another connection that, they were always just the cute couple that lived behind my grandparents and were like their family friends. And like, my mom would go over there and Dr. Apple would play Christmas songs on the piano, and they'd have the tree with the real, candles burning on it and everything. And that was like her experience with that. So it was just, but, but that was just, how I always, took it. Was that was just, the Bloomington neighborhood was, a very charming area, but it was like, I didn't know anything about paperclip at that point, and that was just something that, from watching, your show and with George and Mark and everybody and, all the contributors, there's just a lot of, crossover with Bloomington that's, very interesting. So it's something that, that I'm, trying to learn, as much as I can, but there are a lot of, key characters that are Bloomington related through the music school too, I think.
Sure, and that's a very famous name. Was it Wilfred Adler? Is it?
I don't know, Willie Apple.
Apple, yeah, okay.
Apple. And like they were, he was Jewish and, fled from Germany, and he was originally, he and his wife, his wife was a very, her father was the great sculptor. His last name was like Cimmerian, and he was he did like Bismarck's monument, and he did the Ben Franklin monument in Philadelphia. So he was a very famous artist, and like their nephew, I think, was the defense minister and like the Secretary of State of Germany. That was their nephew. So they were a very politically, connected family from Europe that came to Indiana.
Yeah. Well, I see in the chat that, let's see, who was it that made that comment? Oh, Norman Smith, thank you so much. David is awesome, says Norman Smith. Let's see.
Tell Norman that when you guys when you played the George on My Mind, that people from Bloomington love Hoagie Carmichael, and he is like the Bloomington legend. So anything Hoagie Carmichael is very, Bloomington people are very supportive. So yeah. You've got a lot of.
Well, okay, back home again in Indiana.
Right, that's the fight song.
Yeah, and that's gleaming candlelight shining bright through the sycamores to me. The new mown hay sends out its fragrance across the fields I used to roam. Yeah, man. I can almost see the moonlight on the Wabash, far from my Indiana home. There you go.
That's it, and that's the Purdue song too. Is the old Wabash River too. So that's that we definitely I was aware of all that stuff. Growing up, like with the different Indiana culture. Like there's a colony of artists in Brown County, which is very. If you go to the IU Union, there's, a lot of those artists are featured there. And of course, with Paperclip, again, you always wonder like what the backstory of everybody is. But, it's just a beautiful building, and it's a great place. I love Bloomington.
Well, let's get into some of the content that that you just mentioned, like Paperclip. When I had the same experience as you did, and people have heard me tell this story many times of the first day I met George, and I was blown away by his ability to put so many things together in a nutshell and make sense of it. And I find somebody like that once in a decade, and I can't help it. I really want to just be in the same room and understand, what it's an electric thing. It's like, wow, I really get a charge out of being with somebody like George that can put all that together quickly. And not only that, but carries around a huge database of info that if you say something, he can pull out, some references that'll tie it all together for you. Not to say that he can tie everything together. I mean, people are maybe sometimes thinking that he has a crystal ball, and he doesn't. But to to work with him is stimulating in a way that reminds me of being in college with a really good professor. I had one or two, and even in law school, I had some good professors. So that kind of experience, you can forget about it if you don't, if you don't get run into the right people. So maybe that's one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that keeps us all together too, is that we do appreciate the ability to think, the ability to reason, which clearly you've learned in your school and your experience. What was it
Mm-hmm.
like on? I'll just well, I want to ask you so many things, but let's get into the paperclip question.
Okay.
When did you learn about Operation Paperclip? And it seems to be that's the watershed for you. Could you talk about how that's changed the way
Um,
you've
yeah,
been
I mean,
working?
yeah, I mean, it was, I've probably been watching the show. I started watching when you guys were doing the Mike Flynn trial, was kind of when I came on board. I think it's about 2 years. So, so that was sort of my first introduction to the paperclip. And then I got really into the Fletcher Prouty and sort of learning about the creation of the CIA and sort of how that, kind of bled over from the OSS and then the German intelligence and the Russian intelligence and sort of how those different groups kind of fit together. And and it was just the Dr. Oppel story was definitely one that was the one that I really questioned it, because it was it was just odd that, to be moved, because basically the story was my grandpa was commuting for 4 years from Princeton to RCA. And then he was building his house. And when the house was built, my mom and sister and my grandma moved in. And then the day they moved in, Dr. Oppel knocked on the door and was like, "Hey, I'm, going to be the head of the music school. Can I rent a room?" And he did. And then he bought the house a year behind, right behind him. And then there were also characters that were kind of famous, like Alfred Kinsey. He was a neighbor. He lived just a couple houses away. His wife was my mom's, brownie troop leader. And, there was the other one, and this was with the Perm Index, that was kind of one that was, I didn't think much about originally, was my mom had a friend that was, her grandfather was the president of Czechoslovakia, named Eva Beneš. And, I didn't know, look, when you grow up with that stuff, and again, like where I went to high school and in Michigan, there's also a lot of kind of families that have these kind of, that are part of these very famous companies and, kind of well-known things. So it didn't, a lot of this stuff like didn't really stick out because it kind of all washed together. But, when I learned that, and that my mom's friend's, niece was married to, Zygmunt Brzezinski's, son, there was all these, there's just more to the story. And, of course I always, want to cheer for my grandpa being like this great inventor, because he was so smart and so humble. And so when I heard the Hedy Lamarr story, that really hit me, as like, okay, here's this, the most beautiful woman in the world, and a guy that wrote a couple, I think, screenplays for some movies, and they came up with the proximity fuse and the missile defense systems and GPS and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, it seems more likely that the guy that wrote the Harvard encyclopedia on keyboard theory and my grandpa maybe would potentially be the ones that did that. And then, of course, like in researching, in that 1945 to 1950 range, that was when the proximity fuse project was happening. And, it was called the Madam X project. And then at Bloomington, where my grandpa was, they called it the vacuum cleaner. And they said that Bloomington was the first place that, they had, it was obviously it was as big as the Manhattan Project, but they said that was the place. Bloomington was where it first came from. And of course, the like Potter and Brumfield, where he worked before, that was, eventually became bought up by AMF Atomics later. So I don't know, there's just a lot of weird family stories. Like my uncle Willie went to Purdue also, and I didn't know his backstory. I mean, he sounds exactly like Neil Armstrong. Like, he went to Purdue, he was an engineer there, and Purdue had the first airfield of any college, and he left school to join the Navy, to like your dad did, I think, and then he left school, and he was promised that he would get his diploma if he joined the Naval Air Force, and he was stationed in England, and so it's just like all these things where it's they're just these so many different links with different characters in the story, with even the art, like when we were talking about Bob Muller's dad exchanging the art with Harry Truman. Like, my mom's friend was his dad was the head of the art school, and he was traveling all over the world, collecting art, and they had, Picasso's in their dining room, and, all this stuff. And, it just sounds like the same kinds of stories, just very parallel to a lot of these different groups. So and of course that's my problem, is that I feel like there's so much, it's hard for me to consolidate it. When I talk to like Peter and Tracy, they say how, I have to build scaffolding, and like people don't know the history really. And that's the problem, is that I'm trying to learn the story, the public, kind of the official narrative, the kind of and then the fake narrative, and then what the real story is kind of like a combination of different things. So it's like a lot of information that I'm, trying to use to help George and you guys, but it is based on these, just, different networks that I just kind of observed growing up.
Well, that plus your experience in the financial markets has got to be a great help for you, because I personally I don't feel, I'm totally at sea at looking at things like stocks and stock options. I've been reading the new biography of Cornelius Vanderbilt by T.J. Stiles, and really highly recommend that. It's interesting. It turns out that Vanderbilt is the key I've been looking for. I've been looking for the point where corporations, as envisioned at the time of the Founding Fathers, which was a completely different vision of corporations, how did that change into the multinational corporation monsters that we have now that are really taking over the planet? And it turns out from this book that the answer is that it happened with Vanderbilt. Up until that time, the people that incorporated a corporation, whether it was a railroad or a bridge building company or whatever, the corporation would have a limited time. It was subject to the legislature, because corporations are creatures of the legislatures of the states. And so therefore, they should be doing something in the public interest. That's why they got the right to have this corporate thing that shields them from personal liability, is because they're doing it in the public interest. And the classic example is, you need a bridge to get across the river. Nobody can build it on their own, so you combine your resources, you issue stock certificates, and you get the thing done. People get their money back with some interest, and then you close down the corporation because the bridge is built, and you're done. But what happened just over the first 50 years of our country is that this limited idea of doing something for the public by pooling resources turns into the most wonderful way to make individual wealth that has been invented yet. And so people that are just following the rules end up in a situation where, at a certain point, and Vanderbilt's the guy that did it, when you buy up all the small railroads and consolidate them into one, you don't kill off the corporations, you just make them subsidiaries of a bigger corporation. And then these little corporations now can be traded without any connection to the previous owners. So what they did, whether they knew it or not, was that they created a corporate monster, kind of like a computer that just does everything on its own. A corporation is perpetual now, unless, the legislatures come in and change that idea. And a corporation now is, according to the Supreme Court, has the rights of a person. So this is the hugest economic problem that we have right now, is that the corporations are coming in and doing whatever they want to, and government no longer has the power to control them. It's no longer about the public interest. It's about the private interest of the wealthy stockholders of these huge and behemoths of corporations. So I guess my point that comes out of our conversation tonight is that one of the big things for the future is to rein in these super corporations and put them back under the control of the government, because the only reason they were created, again, was to do something in the public interest. And look what they're doing right now. They're just raping every resource, every asset, every person that they can get a hold of. And who can blame them? That's what the law says. It says, maximize the value to the stockholders. That's the job of the management team of any corporation. Well, from your point of view, how do you react to that? Do you think that I've put my finger on one of the biggest problems that the country has right now, or do you? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I was always somebody that was really interested in business, and I read a lot of the Warren Buffett books and stuff when I was in high school and college. I thought that's what I wanted to do, was basically financial statement analysis and be like a stock analyst. So I always had the perspective that I wanted to understand financial accounting and how transactions flow and work, and what the value is of that. And then, I learned from my grandpa that things need to be repeatable and not break down. And, and makes sense. And that's kind of always how I've been naturally wired. So when I analyze a lot of these systems like you're describing, I just horrified, because it's obvious they're intentionally just made to, obfuscate any kind of ability to really do any analysis where you can really understand what's going on. And like you said, with different ownership and, kind of the idea of using kind of bad guy proxies, to sort of do your dirty work for you while you skate clean. I mean, that's a, a very old strategy. And it is something that I like to do, is kind of look at the different areas. The one that was really big for me recently was, I've looked at the Federal Reserve a lot and sort of the money trust with the Jekyll Island, that kind of story, and how they partnered with Congress basically to form a cartel between those two entities. The one that I didn't know anything about was the Reconstruction Finance Committee in 1933. And that one is very important. It's like a second round of the Federal Reserve, only it was for after it was basically for the New Deal, and it has a lot of roots in Detroit, which if you saw the video that I did with Addie about a month ago, where we were looking at the Fisher Building and the General Motors Building, the Bank of Detroit was a key player in that 1933 Reconstruction Finance Committee, and that was also General Motors was also a partner with the government in that program. So there's a lot of corporate history, corporate structure. I mean, I think even like when we look at the Perm Index, like to me, what that represents is just basically almost like a mutual fund of different front companies to rinse the war spoil money. So, I do think that, I look back to when they first created the indexes, or like with the Dow Transportation Index was the first index, and it was only 8 companies. So we went from like the late 1800s where there were 8 companies, and then they started, going to the Dow 30, and then, the S&P 500, the Russell. So the indexes kept getting bigger, and to me that was to make it more confusing. So that's why I like to kind of go back in time and look at these kind of earlier transactions. Like I was reading the George Bush biography today, and trying to really learning a lot about the Columbus, Ohio, and because that was another area where they weren't using the Reconstruction Finance Committee, but they were using the War Appropriation Board for their financing for these huge arms factories, basically also building railroads and equipment for the Harriman. So, you know, I feel like I've gotten it into like kind of the right group of people to study, and that's really what I'm trying to do, is really learn those relationships, because it is just intertwined with that original kind of Federal Reserve group, with the Nelson Aldrich and the Warburgs, and the Kuhn and Loeb people, and the Rockefeller banking. I mean, that's the right banking groups, and JP Morgan, of course, too. So, it is, so I guess I'm just trying to work on ways to, kind of consolidate information, and I guess like tell it kind of more in a narrative that hopefully people can kind of understand and follow along.
Yeah, well, we're all doing that, and it takes a long time. I've been working on my trying to write a biography of my dad, and it's hard because there's so much that we still don't know. And so I hesitate, and then I want to look up this and that, and then I think, oh, well, what about that guy? Maybe, and then I look up his biography, and the next thing you know, I've jumped down the rabbit hole.
Right.
It's hard for me to sit down and come up with a finished product. So I guess it's just not time for me yet to actually write. But I'm spending 10,
Which,
12 hours researching every day.
yeah,
How about you? I imagine you spend a lot of time researching.
I spend all day doing. I mean, I'm basically just all dusk till dawn, just trying to read and put things together as much as I can. The one thing I did want to ask you was, I feel like I did hear that your dad spent time in Ann Arbor, at Michigan. Was that correct or incorrect?
Yeah, just by coincidence, I noticed that when you first opened your studio, and I was getting contact with Aaron, and I told him, hey, by the way, my dad was a professor of naval science at
Hmm.
at Ann Arbor, at it's University of Michigan, right, at Ann Arbor,
Yep.
and it was in 1946. It was after the war ended, and they sent everybody home. That was his next assignment, and he taught naval science at the University of Michigan. At that time, he was also recruited by the Detroit Lions to play football for him.
Okay.
He had other plans. His family back in Connecticut was having some kind of crisis going on, and his father just appealed to him, please come home. And so he went home and studied and took the law school at the University of Connecticut instead
Hmm.
of staying in the Navy, which I think was his heart's desire. But we do things for our families, and I'm glad he did. Of course, I wouldn't be here if he hadn't. So
Yeah.
things turn out the way they're supposed to, I hope. Um,
Yep. Well,
but I was going to get back to the point about Columbus for a minute. It's funny
yeah,
how many things seem to get started in Columbus, and we were.
and
Uh,
University of Michigan and Ohio State have a lot of very important connections. Ohio State is partnered with Battelle, which we've done a lot of work on. Battelle, as far as innovator in nuclear sciences, and all Xerox. They created the first Xerox, so that obviously was a kind of a landmark technology, was the Xerox. So Battelle and Ohio State, and then with the University of Michigan and its relationship with the Willow Run, doing the bomber factories. But then it got into sort of the different like Nike missile systems and things like that through Michigan's engineering, and they also had the Ford nuclear reactor at Willow Run. So there was a lot of, of course, Detroit being the arsenal of democracy. We had a lot of manufacturing capability there, and the University of Michigan was a place where they, apparently. Got into their engineering department, got into those different rocket sciences and things like that. And then the other one that was another one that was that the school did had a Phoenix program. I don't know if you saw that video that I sent of the marching band doing the Michigan Phoenix program, but that was the memorial fund for the I think it was for World War II, but it was a it was to promote this Ford reactor, basically. So something to.
We're not talking about a Vietnam Phoenix program. We're just talking about.
My theory is that a lot of the Phoenix participants that were kind of studying, like with the first one I think of obviously is Mahler. I think that there was a lot of exfiltration through the University of Michigan and through the Ohio State University, and I think it was, I feel like they use different names for things, and the one that I always think of first is the World Wildlife Fund, where it was always the cute panda and the African animals, and then it turned into wrestling when I was a little kid. It was WWF, and I feel like they use these cultural changes to get you to sort of forget about the old branding of things, and I do fear that the University of Michigan was because of course they had the Yippies were from Ann Arbor, and with their role in with the DNC and or the in '68 with nominating the pig, and it sounds like they're the Akpor of the '60s was that Yippie group. So I as much as I love Ann Arbor because my dad's family is from there, and my grandma from Ohio went there, and her family were all doctors from University of Michigan. I think there's a lot of terrible things that went through Michigan, and it's sad for me, but I'm trying to learn about it, and hopefully we can understand what happened.
Well, there is a lot, and Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State under Wilson, I believe, I think he was from Michigan and was the uncle of John Foster Dulles.
He was actually from near Buffalo, where my dad's family.
Oh,
I went to Cornell, but Lansing is the state capital. The one that's the Lansing, the Michigan one that's an old name that I think is important is Trowbridge, because there's the Trowbridge is the guest house for the president on Lafayette Square, and Trowbridge was I think maybe an early justice of the Michigan territories, but there's a Trowbridge Street in Lansing, and then there's he was from Troy, Michigan originally, which is where all the Kelly Services stuff is too. So it's like always names, and you go, Trowbridge is where you turn off when you visit your friends that go to Michigan State. So that's how I always thought of it, and I didn't realize that it was like the guest house that I don't know if it was the one that Dolly Madison like had or whatever, but there's all that old history of all that kind of stuff.
Thanks. I was wrong about the Lansing. I thought it was the same family.
Yeah, my dad's family's from they grew up in Trumansburg, and they all went to Cornell. So they're, of course, that was another kind of leg of my family history that is it's just like hard to hear it all, because my great uncle was he worked for the Sanger, not the Margaret, but I think the uncle that was the head of the War Department, and he was like he worked in New York, in Long Island, and then he went to Brazil and died of yellow fever in 1904 working for the Brazilian government. So there's a lot of these kind of weird stories like that where you just hear that once when you're a little kid, but you don't really think of the implications of it, and what they were doing in Brazil, and how then, like, with all the desire to have rubber was such a big goal strategically, and how Brazil played into that is, there's just a lot of things that just trying to put together. So
you mentioned a little while ago a string of bankers from Kuhn, Loeb, Schiff, Warburg, Rockefeller. Those names all have been very much in my on my radar lately, because I've gotten again re-energized to study the Pilgrim Society. And that has come about as a result of connections between the Pilgrim Society and Pfizer board members, and also a lot of there's a YouTube channel called AIM, which involves somebody named Douglas Gabriel and a man named Michael McKibben, who started a business in Columbus, Ohio. Worked on a computer program, and in Columbus, Ohio, he started his business. I can't call the name of it, but his name is Michael McKibben, and he's the guy that claims that the U.S. military stole his idea and turned it into Facebook, and gave it to Zuckerberg. And that makes a lot of sense to me, knowing the Palantirs, the history of that heist, and I'm sure an awful lot of other technological advances that private people have come up with have just been snatched by the DARPA people, or the people that run military intelligence and say, hey, we need one of those, and just grab it, and then. Yeah. From that point on, it's just you try to get your patent back, or try to win some money in court, and you just spin your wheels, and you can't beat these guys. They're the inside track. They've got the inside track on everything. So it makes sense to me. But I thought that's interesting that there's another that this guy, and it also reminds me of Dr. Shiva, who's claims to have invented email, and of course never got a dime out of that. But all of this goes back to these bankers, I think, and the ultimate motivation seems to as quickly as possible to own every single resource on the planet, and that, I think, gets right into the Pilgrim Society, because that was Cecil Rhodes's vision, was to create an Anglo-Saxon world in which nobody gets. If you're not Anglo-Saxon, you're going to have a tough life. Let's just put it that way. And this has been the foundation of our economy, of the wars, of our just the incredible losses of life in the 20th century and 21st century up to now. These guys are willing to do anything to consolidate power over the entire world. But yet nobody hears about them. I was a little interested in them a few years ago, but recently, with it being in my face like this, I've started studying it and reading this new book called Killing the Planet by Paul L. Williams and Rodney Brown. And there's no joke. It's real. There is this Pilgrim Society. It really has been going on since 1902. And these folks are meeting behind closed doors secretly amongst themselves, and they have no mercy as far as dealing with other people that are not from their Anglo-Saxon background, or pretty darn close to it. The incredible story of eugenics that I've been telling on my channel, it's just too horrible to believe. And so people turn away from it. But right now, I mean, I think we have got right now an example of what looks to me like an effort to do some depopulation through medical means, through lockdowns, and making us depressed, sick, and lacking sunlight, lacking the proper medication, proper vitamins, I should say, and just plain getting depressed because we can't see our families over the holidays and birthdays.
Yeah.
This seems to me, David, to be a culmination of the dreams of those guys back in 1902, sitting around with their
Yeah.
cognac and their cigars, thinking, "Hey, you know what? We could get rid of all that scum out there and have it all for ourselves. What do you say, oh boy?"
Yeah. I mean, it just looks like it's the old, trade company system, and it's, based off of that and the privateers, I think, and it's kind of those philosophies. And I think part of the fun is not really explaining the rules of the game to people. And when you talk about sort of these Cecil Rhodes and the great game of the 20th century, and monopolizing petroleum and the transportation of it. I mean, I do think that when we look at these, you know, um, the idea of like what you've talked about with the Rockefeller medicine of trying to monetize pills and use petroleum to make supply and then create demand for the products. I do think it does tie to the Belt and Road that we were talking about. And I do think that it is, I think these things are horrible, but I do think they are used strategically. And, it is like to clear out zones when they're doing the mining and building things and infrastructure projects. And it is, it's hard to believe that, but when you get into the studies, you do see that you talk about the Pilgrim Society. Another big link that I've been looking at is the sort of connection between what was the merchandise marts, which became the trade marts, which then became the World Trade Centers, which were affiliated with the International House. And if you look at the International House in New York, that could just be like the old East India Company of 2020. I mean, it is, the group is, all the favorite characters in there. So it's, I do look at, these medical programs that I do, it's hard to believe that they happen. I mean, I was with you when this stuff was first breaking out and we were watching these press conferences, horrified at, nobody knew what was going on. The explanations weren't plausible. It was just, everyone was just terrified because it's like, well, you can pretend there's nothing to be afraid of and then get burned, or you can, follow the rules and, just accept that you're not going to have the same life that you want. So, I do think the financial aspect is a big deal. I know you and George were talking about that today about, the reset and this idea of, collapsing the economy. I sadly have thought that was part of the big plan, was to have the Cold War end with Russia collapsing first and then having the United States collapse in the second wave, and as sort of the kind of classic, get the country to spend all their money and then collapse them and then just take all the hard assets, in the end. And I don't want that to happen, obviously. So, I'm just doing what I can, as far as trying to identify which groups are doing it now and why they're doing it, because they're historically the same groups. They are. So it's scary because, you look at people in such key positions that, are working against you. So, it's there's not a lot of encouragement, I guess, when you learn these things, because you just see that it's really, it's just the systems are just in place and they're still just kind of chugging along. And, hopefully we can create enough awareness for people to kind of understand who people are and what their careers entailed and what their relationships are as far as, business and, political relationships and just sort of re-understand the character so you can get a clearer view of what is happening. Because I am honestly, it's very, I've been upset about this for years, just from studying the stock market. Like when you see what the the debt levels are, and then they don't even include the unfunded liabilities, which are like I think 8 times what they even publish. So it's just like it just doesn't make sense from like even the most basic analysis. So it's just, hopefully, we can get some, we talked a while ago about, filtering the system that we have and doing, an audit of it and sort of evaluating what the really good parts are that we need to keep. And then, hopefully, prune off a lot of these systems that were created just to be, protect certain characters or corporations, as you said, or, confuse people or, make them frustrated so they don't look into things.
Yeah, our good colleague Deborah pointed out earlier on that I mentioned Serco, and she said, well, Serco is the royals have it, the Queen has the golden share, and what's the golden share? That's the share that trumps all the other shares.
There too, right? Golden Pilbright, isn't that the medical one?
Right. The Purebright and the Purebright Institute and all of that stuff. We've got to study it. We've got to keep it up. And
yeah.
Well, David, thanks for this hour with you to get to know you a little bit and know you a little bit better. Of course, we had met at the Charettes, and I enjoy watching you at Neighborhood News Studio. You are now working with them as kind of a correspondent, I guess, and how's that going? I think the channel is really building quickly. I see that they've got quite a few subscribers and getting a lot of good got a lot of good viewing. So, how's that going from your point of view?
Well, I obviously am torn because I want to be with everybody and traveling around, but I do I also like to be home, with my dog. I mean, it's sad to say that, but it's true. And
sure, no, it's not sad.
It's the reality. It's just, it just adds a layer of complication to traveling. And
yeah.
But I watch everything, and I text, try to text information that I hope is helpful to people, and try to post things on Twitter. I mean, I know it's, the criticism is correct. It's just way too much information. I'm just sort of dumping it because that's sort of my process for how I learn it myself, because all this stuff is new. It's just I see it and I think it's important that, I just post it on Twitter. So hopefully people can, if they want to see it, they can, or, if it's, or skip it or whatever. So it's, I'm just trying to do that. I want to, I'm just trying to, I guess, trying to figure out ways to sort of, take the information that I have and do a better job of communicating it with people.
Well, you're doing great. I think you have so much to offer. I know you're going to keep at it. And also, I just want to also say, I mean, you're the type of person that could be right now down on Wall Street making six figures. I don't have, there's no doubt in my mind. And so you're devoting your time to working on the more important part of life, and that is preserving our freedom for the next generations. And you being a generation or two after me, I have to tell you, I'm thrilled to have you riding along, and I want to support you and your research the best that I can. I think you are a terrific addition to what George is doing, and also Bill Taylor. He's really into the financial markets too. I want you and him to get together sometime.
Well, I would love to get together with Bill because I've got the Wayne State Gibson Island connections with Dr. Neil Gordon, who was the organizer of the conferences. So he was a Wayne State person. So that, again, I can get the Detroit connections, because there's a lot of obviously crossover of those families from Michigan and Maryland.
All right. Well, folks at this chat room, thanks for being with us tonight. And David, we'll have you back soon. Good luck with all of your great research. And we'll be in touch constantly, I think, on Twitter, because you and I are both very, very active Twitterers right now. I know what you mean about wanting to just dump stuff. I did that myself on the issue of what the heck is mRNA? And I tried to put a tag, what do you call it, a thread together for that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
That
we'll be.
was so I feel like I need to post those things just so that people I don't know I missed that somehow. So
All right. All right, David, thanks again. And everybody, have a great evening. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow. Let's see, what is it? Thursday? So I'll be back with Minefields tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Good night, everybody.
thanks, John.